Somalia's government has accepted assistance from the CIA to help it contain the radical group Al-Shabaab. That may not be surprising news, but a recent report by a human rights group claims to have uncovered a torture camp in the Somali capital, Mogadishu. This week, Africa Today discusses allegations that this torture camp is based underneath the presidential compound and has been holding inmates as young as 14 years old. Join us as we ask if Somalia's Western-backed government has now resorted to torturing its own citizens.
A report by human rights group Reprieve claims to have uncovered a CIA torture camp in the Somali capital of Mogadishu. It is alleged that inmates as young as 14 and others are rendered from Kenya and are detained in a base that lies underneath the presidential compound. The US has been running a counter-terrorism training program for Somali's National Security Agency, NSA. The report adds NSA staffs receive their salaries from the CIA and are reportedly in charge of running the detention camp while the CIA interrogates prisoners kept there. The report further pointed out that the number of prisoners being held was unclear, and in some cases people had been detained for about 18 months without access to lawyers or a trial. While the US has refused to comment on the findings of the report, the Somali government has admitted that the US was helping it improve the security situation in a country largely controlled by the radical group Al-Shabaab. Africa Today now looks at the role the Somali government is playing in the torture of its own citizens.
Human rights group Reprieve claims that the Somali government has essentially given the CIA carte blanche to do whatever is necessary to quell the threat of Al-Shabaab. Is this situation really a question of improving security in Somalia, or evidence of a government that has handed over the running of its security services to an imperial power? I'm Vuiswang Ngobongwana, welcoming you to Africa Today. I'm joined by Asim Qureshi, the Executive Director of Cage Prisoners, and Mr. Zakaria Mahmoud Haj Abdi, the Chairman of the Alliance for the Re-Liberation of Somalia. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. I might add at this point that we did extend an invite to the US Embassy to join our discussion, but perhaps not surprisingly, they declined to comment. If I could bring the first question to you, Asim. First of all, it may be shocking to people who are not familiar with Somalia to hear these kind of allegations, but how plausible are these allegations as far as you're aware?
They're not just plausible, they're actual fact. In the end of 2006, early 2007, Ethiopia invaded Somalia with the backing of the US. The US has been based in Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti since early 2004. They set up the Joint Task Force for the Horn of Africa, and they've been training and equipping the Ethiopians as well as partners within the region to effectively counter what they claim is terrorism. Now,
would you say that this was the heart in Africa for the US foreign policy, that area, the Horn of Africa, was the heart of their campaign against the so-called war on terror?
It's called the Joint Task Force for the Horn of Africa, so it's specifically been set up for that part of Africa in order to counter what they claim is the threat of international terrorism. Now, when I went over there, it was specifically to work on the cases of 4 British men who were detained in Kenya and were then put on a rendition flight onto Somalia. Now, at the time, we managed to procure, along with Reprieve, I was out there with one of my colleagues from Reprieve, we managed to procure the flight logs, and on these flight logs you had the names of all of these citizens from countries all over the world, from Sweden, from Egypt, from Tunisia, from many different countries. But not only that, they weren't just men, they were women as well, and also very, very young children were put on these rendition flights back into Somalia. And from Somalia, in Somalia, they were held in a secret prison under Mogadishu airport. And we've taken lots of testimony in relation to this, and they all described exactly the same treatment. From there, they were from the detention there, they were then sent on to Ethiopia, where they were kept in these chicken wire cages, very much reminiscent of the wire cages in Guantanamo Bay that were initially used. And in fact, when they were brought before a court, the court said to them that we're trying to ascertain whether or not you're enemy combatants, the same terminology that the Americans used for those detained in Guantanamo. So what we're seeing in the Horn of Africa is actually an extension of US foreign policy, except the US, should we say, they've smartened up a little bit. They're not so interested in showing a public face of their hands being dirty, but rather teaching others how to carry on the policies that they've carried out elsewhere in the world.
Right, this is pretty damning condemnation of the current transitional government in Somalia. As part of an organization that is talking about the re-liberation of Somalia, what are your initial thoughts on the comments that you've just heard from Asim?
Well, there is what we call Guantanamo Bay number 2 in Mogadishu, actually, and that started long ago. Obviously, the United States military and intelligence was involved in Somalia since the collapse of the Somali state in 1991. If you recall, in 1992, the Americans sent about 30,000 troops in an operation called Restore Hope. At the time, they have killed more than 12,000 Somalis and injured about 10,000, decapitated 12,000. Since then, the Americans are involved there. There is an American elite troops in the coast of Somalia who frequently make incursions inside the territory of Somalia. They use drones. They use commando-style operations, and they kill whoever they want.
But it sounds like this America is using Somalia almost like a sort of military testing ground for various military techniques that it's evolving.
Right, yeah, and this has been going for the last 2 decades, mind you. It's not only, they have used Ethiopians in 2006, as the gentleman said, when they felt the Islamic courts are actually trying to stabilize the country. And this was a threat to them. Their project in Somalia is failed, and there is a local initiative, a kind of public rebellion against the warlords that the Americans have supported all along to kill and maim and destroy Somali people and Somali resources.
So are you essentially saying that they're helping to maintain a divide and rule policy whilst at the same time utilizing the area to test their high-grade military strategies and weapons?
They have polarized Somali society into 2 groups.
Yes.
One group, as the whole society, one group, branded as terrorists, those who are not working with them, and the other ones are their spies. Well, and it's not only Mogadishu. In Puntland region, there is what they call PIS, which is Puntland Intelligence Agency. These people, they terrorize and kill indiscriminately. The last 2 weeks, they have invaded a neighborhood in Galkayo, a central town, a very important central town in Somalia. Right. They have killed and maimed a lot of people.
And we hear very little about this in any media, Asim. I mean, tell us a little bit about what your organization, Caged Prisoners and Reprieve, where they fit in this scenario and how you get your information out.
Well, I mean, the way that we got involved in this is really through the work that we've been doing on secret detentions elsewhere in the world. We've been working for a very long time on secret prisons within the context of the war on terror. And we initially started this, we didn't think that the problem was as deep as it actually is. Initially it was just, okay, here are a few cases of some guys who've been picked up on alleged terrorism. In fact, all 4 men were released without any charges and they returned to the UK, as well as all the other foreign nationals that were there. And it literally, one step at a time, the more we looked into it, the more we realized that actually Africa is being used as a proxy detention facility. Really, I can't think of any other way to describe it. The same process of rendition is taking place, the same process of holding people without charge or trial incommunicado. And so that's how really we got involved from the perspective of detention. But as the gentleman's mentioned, once you start looking into it further, then you start seeing, okay, actually they're actually using drone strikes as well. So extrajudicial killings have become a commonplace feature of the way that the war on terror is being prosecuted there.
And what do you think of the allegation that this torture camp is actually underneath the presidential compound?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, whether or not it's specifically a torture camp, I think that might be a little bit sensationalized, but the fact that torture and abuse happens there is, of course, par for the course, really, in these kinds of places.
Right.
There are 3 sites in Mogadishu. One is the airport.
Yes.
Run exclusively by the CIA agents. And the other one is underneath of the presidential compound.
Right.
And that is the permanent one. And the third one is in the previously headquarters of the Somali National Secret Service. So the first one is being run by the Americans, and the second one under the nose of the president also run by Somalis and Americans. The third one is mainly run by the American agencies, actually. Somalis who have been paid by the Americans. They pay $200 per person.
Right.
And the monthly salary, they brought a small airline from Nairobi with US cash dollars and distribute to those agents, to those spies.
And in an environment where famine is ever a threat, employment opportunities are practically non-existent because the country is so unstable, it's very easy, you're saying, to bribe people into becoming involved.
The famine itself is being made by the Americans, I'm telling you, because what happened is the southern part of Somalia is mainly the basket of the agricultural land.
Yeah.
The Ethiopian forces, which is being used by the Americans, funded by the Americans, and as well as British. If you remember that invasion, Tony Blair has paid $400 million to Ethiopians to invade Somalia.
Yeah.
And the British Secret Services were also involved to guide the Ethiopian invasion, Ethiopian troops to enter into Mogadishu.
Right.
And they have been working almost six months before the Ethiopian invasion. This is written in the British journals.
What we're hearing is that Al-Shabaab controls most of the country. I mean, how true is that?
No, and the people that I'm speaking to on the ground, they're effectively saying that, look, Al-Shabaab is a very kind of general concept. It depends on who's looking at various individuals. Yeah, Al-Shabaab does exist, but then everybody's labeled Al-Shabaab regardless of whether or not they're actually, members of that as a kind of general organization. What's interesting, of course, is the fact that from the information that I've been receiving is that actually they're the ones who are bringing at least some semblance of stability to various parts of the country, which is quite interesting in itself. And the fact that the places which are most hard hit by any droughts are the areas that aren't actually being controlled by the Shabaab or being run by them. So I mean, I think there's a lot of propaganda that's coming out of here.
Yes.
And it's quite difficult sometimes to ascertain what is actually going on. The Western media obviously is being fed its information from their security sources and whatever else, but it's important that we actually get a clear image of what's taking place there and what different countries' interests are within the region.
Which is something we are going to be discussing in the second part of the show after your comments through our Facebook, email and texts. What is the geopolitical significance of Somalia, and why does America seemingly want Somalia so much? Indeed, has America actually got control of Somalia? From what we're hearing, it sounds like quite an ominous potential. So let's move on to what you are thinking about what's going on in Somalia. And we have on our Facebook page a comment from Mahmoud, who lives here in London. Mahmoud says, I think the Somali government has failed the people. How could they support the CIA in torturing their own citizens? Shame on them. Moving on to our emails, we have a comment on the same topic from Musa. Musa lives in Kenya, and Musa comments, it's not surprising that the CIA has set up a detention center in Somalia. The US is pretending to help stabilize Somalia, but I think their real motive is to find a way back into a country they are struggling to control. And moving on to our texts, we have a text from Issa, who's based in Tunisia, and Issa is commenting on the situation in Egypt. Perhaps there are correlations between Egypt and Somalia, but the comment is, Egyptians should not allow the military rulers to spoil their revolution. If they don't bring about the changes and reforms they promised,